Through the hot red tides of sin.
This is Faith Blind
Council.
Everything is within.
You create the light. We are one.
That's it.
We're here.
We did it. We're alive. It feels like we haven't talked in fucking decades at this point. Like
It's the longest year on record.
Just the old lady on the Titanic. It's been 84 years since last month. It's been wild. But we're here. We're ready to go. I'm super excited for today's episode. We should probably do some intros first, though. That would be smart. I am Frauder Dreadnought.
Frauder Yarmarud.
Seda Cologne.
And we have got a really exciting interview for today's episode. We're going to be talking about Tantra, which, if we go back to the very first episode of this show...
Yeah. And speaking of which, Dreadnought, are you going to kind of fix your definition for what Tantra is?
Nope.
Okay.
Nope.
Yeah.
We're doubling down. Doubling down on it.
That's a fucking bold move, man.
No, in all seriousness, though, Tantra is a thing that I am not very familiar with at all. I'm not super well-versed as far as, like, terminology. I'm not really, like... I wouldn't even necessarily, like, say that I have grounds to really speak about it. But since then, I've done a little bit of research, and, like, I gotta say that the parts of it that I think I understand, like, I'm with it. It seems like a good practice, but I can't really, like, elaborate on it because I'm stupid. So there's that. I'm like, and tell me if I'm wrong on any of this, but basically, Tantra is kind of like a super, like, metaphysical punk rock thing as a way to kind of, like, revolt against the reality that you're given.
Yeah, no, that's kind of it. So my background, and since we started and everything, and I've looked into it more and incorporated some tantric practices in my own work. That's kind of the gist that I get from it, sort of too. But as a caveat, know that most of my studying has been in the branch of Shaiva Shakti Tantra. And there are a lot of different schools of Tantra, as it were. So, like, even our interview today, our interviewee, who was gracious enough to try and piece together thinking about what Tantra is in general, he practices a form of Buddhist Tantra. So, yeah, there's differing schools, but they still kind of have the same underlying principles, as it were.
I'm actually, like, kind of super interested to hear that take, because, like, to me, Buddhism has always kind of inherently seemed, like, revolutionary. Not in the sense of, like, yeah, we're gonna start the revolution, man, but, like, the Buddhism has always been about breaking cycles, right? It's always been about, like, pushing beyond the things that you're given in order to, like, attain understanding, right?
Yeah.
And the very, like, limited knowledge that I have on Tantra, that they seem like they just go hand in hand.
Yeah. And historically, from what I've gathered and pieced together, kind of like with what you had mentioned as what Tantra is, like a punk rock, fuck this thing. It's Tantra itself is, in a very basic essence, a mystical practice within either Hinduism or Buddhism or Sikhism, most of the major Eastern religions. It's kind of like mystical practices within those. Kind of like how we had the episode on Gnosticism, which was mystic Christianity.
Okay. All right. That kind of allows, like, it kind of gives it an anchor point to kind of look at it from.
Right. And so the Tantra that I've studied since, 2 years ago that we started this thing, which is Shiva Shakti. It started off kind of like you had said as like a punk rock going against the flow thing. Shiva Shakti is non-dual. A lot of religions and paradigms throughout the world have a kind of dualist nature in which there's, take fucking Christianity. There's God and then there's Satan. There's good, there's evil. There's great things in the world, there's bad things in the world. Within Shiva Shakti Tantra, that doesn't exist. There is no good and evil. Everything just is.
Okay. Yeah, you see a lot of that in, like, Zen ideology as well. Not to that degree, necessarily, but, like, Zen looks at things from a standpoint of, like, good and evil are the same thing.
Yes.
They're just experienced differently.
Mm-hmm. And so within this, like, it's kind of confusing, at least from an outside perspective, with Shiva Shakti. They're basically like two separate entities, and you could see it as a kind of dualist thing, but really they're just kind of like flip sides of the same coin, where you have Shiva or Shiva representing consciousness, and Shakti representing creation. And so you can't have creation without consciousness because you cannot experience creation without consciousness, and you can't have that consciousness without creation because you can't then experience anything if there is no creation.
Okay, so it seems like in Shiva Shakti that, like, creation is then kind of necessarily seen as, like, a conscious act.
Yes.
Okay.
And so when you get to the whole, like, there's no good or evil, it is kind of tricky because, like, you can, especially from a Western perspective, you have things where it is like, no, that's, like, clearly bad. Like, that's a shitty thing. Like, why is that? That's a bad thing. How is there any good in that? But so, like, one example of a bad situation that could be turned into something good is, say, you lose a loved one or a family member, and that's very much a bad thing. That sucks. That's a shitty thing to happen. But you can turn that into good by using this tantric thinking and this tantric mindset of saying, like, well, their death and thus my grieving of it can be seen as an expression of how much love that there existed between myself and that other person.
Okay. Do you think that there's, like, do you think that part of the challenge with understanding Tantra, like, comes from language? I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this, because language, especially, like, the English language, is inherently dualistic. Like, it's there's a part of language that is so ingrained in, like, synonym, antonym, like, oppositional nature.
Right.
Like how you learn things is kind of oppositional, especially with English, right? Like, you learn hot, cold, you learn dark, light, you learn, sweet, sour, like, all of these things that are kind of thrown at you in this oppositional kind of dualistic nature. And I would venture a guess as to say, like, that's part of the reason why a lot of people have trouble grasping things, because, like, in the context of Tantra, it feels like we don't have a language for it.
Yeah, and that's very true. There is very much a dualist nature to our, like, Western reality in that aspect, where there are antonyms and synonyms and whatever, and even the whole concept of having a negating word. So, like, you have is and then is not. It just isn't. But this is one thing where working within Tantra, or working from a tantrist or a tantric ideology as a tantrika, which is one who practices tantra, you have to change your mindset into thinking not so much that they're opposites, rather than seeing things as on a spectrum.
So basically, you're talking about like the kind of like the Hermetic principle of polarity.
Yeah, polarity, and that's perfect. So like, seeing things as even different on like a spectrum, where you have one thing on one end of the spectrum is the complete opposite of the other side. If I guess it could be easier to kind of perceive everything as like kind of like a bar magnet, right? So wherever you split that magnet, if you actually like break it apart, you're going to then have, you'll still have the two sides. Like you'll have a polar side, or you'll have like a polar side and then a non-polar side, like regardless of where you split it.
Okay. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that kind of makes sense. Cologne, I'm interested to hear about like what, if any, experience you have with Tantra, or like if it's something that like you have like an interest in, or anything, because like it's pretty, it's a pretty like dense thing, or maybe I'm just dense. I don't know.
Well, most of my experience with Tantra is much more in the practical realm. I'm familiar, if I can mention a book that was recommended to me. Urban Tantra is where I have most of my knowledge of Tantra, and it's much more on the practical end of just practicing tantric practices, and much less of the metaphysical of what you're discussing. Although obviously, like, Yara and I have had conversations before where clearly I'm interested in this concept of like good and bad not being so much as polar opposites, as being on the spectrum, and just being experiences that we have to experience as, conscious beings. Like my understanding of Tantra really just comes down to really simple practices that most people are, well, if you know anything about Tantra, might be familiar with, things like, breathing, being in your body, and it's not just about sex, but about like your everyday practices in life. So
see, I wasn't wrong. You do things because you gotta do them. It's about the experience.
Yeah. Yes, in a very, very watered down, tangential connection.
In what could be the most reductive take.
Yeah.
But no, I'm really interested to hear about like how you apply that practically. Because we can sit here and kind of like wax philosophic for hours about like, well, the things are just the things and blah 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 blah, and then we can become every other occult podcast out there. But I'm much more interested in you having used it practically. How does that like work for you, and what ways would you tell people, or like, what ways would you suggest people start to incorporate that?
Whew, okay. Well, I feel like it's kind of it's going to sound kind of lame, because it's not that much different from so much other magical practice when you start. Because, we talk a lot about how important like meditation is, how important it is to kind of be present in your body, to, and having certain control over like your mind and that. And like some of the most basic practices of Tantra is usually like breathing methods, and methods of, in a sense, gnosis, of being in your body, being able to control your, like your emotional response, or how you're feeling, your energy through breathing and movement, and being focused on that experience in the moment, rather than focusing on the goal. So like, practicing like breathing methods. I'm really bad with names of things, but like circular breathing is like a really popular thing, or fire breathing. Like these are like really, really basic, practices to start focusing on your body and how using it affects you mentally and emotionally.
Yeah, I definitely understand that. I do a lot of, like, basically anytime I'm doing any kind of meditation work, or if I'm just trying to fucking calm down, I do a lot of, like, the 4x4 breath, or, like, the fourfold breath. If you want to, like, sound really like a fucking cool dude that wears saris a lot, you can call it the fourfold breath. But, like, just doing that alone, right? It's if you strip away the fucking crazy, like, metaphorical language from things, you realize how much is just simple technique.
Yeah, and I think from a practical standpoint, it's with the like metaphysical language that we're using to describe the perspective of Tantra, it's a little difficult, but I think that in order to begin, especially from a non-dualist approach, in order to actually start practicing it, you have to kind of force that mentality on yourself, because the practice and the ideology are so intrinsically wound that it's very difficult to separate them. So, like, for example, we talked about this in the interview, but just very briefly, the concept of invocation of a deity, right? When it comes into this, well, if you have the non-dualist perspective of there's only consciousness and there's only creation, well, ultimately then you are the deity. And so, like, through practicing things like mudras and mantras and incorporating yantras into your shit, like, what those are either phrases or with, say, a mandala, that is a physical representation of the deity. And so when you incorporate those things into yourself, it is at that moment where you become the supreme. You are that, because that's all there is. There's only consciousness, there is only creation, and so you are, in essence, always invoked, because you always are the deity, because you always are consciousness.
Okay. I mean, like, I understand what's being, like, the mindset there. I think, like, practically the thing that I guess to take away from that is it's not a state of not being invoked. It's a state of unlocking that potential, right?
Yes.
And because, like, you can sit there and be like, yes, I am always God, and you are always God, and then you're Charles Manson. And nobody wants that.
Right. Oh, well, and there was this one book that I had read where it actually brought up that in a good aspect, because by practicing Tantra, you become a very powerful person. And the problem with that can be is if a very shitty person practices Tantra, they become, thus, a very powerful shitty person.
Gross.
Right. And so that in particular is one of the reasons that in almost all tantric traditions, there's the kind of prerequisite that you must have a guru. There must be someone that you study under. It's something that's very difficult, if not impossible, to do on your own, because if you see it as kind of like a trinity of Tantra. So there's the tantric scriptures, there's the guru, and then there's the tantrika, the practitioner. And so, yes, the tantrika studies the scriptures and everything, but without that guru there to say, like, well, no, you interpreted that wrong, you're going to end up following a way which kind of separates you from that universality that exists within creation. Like, you need that filter to tell you, like, no, that's not it. You're not seeing the whole picture. You need to sit back and, like, do some more introspection on this.
Okay, so I guess my question then is like, if there is no inherent evil in Tantra, like, how do you square that circle of like, there is no evil, however, comma, you need someone to show you how to do it the right way.
Right. It's because you would end up like meshing that, because like, no, there's no evil, there's no wrong way of doing things, but it's a matter of like not seeing the whole picture, as it were. So you would need okay, so take for example like a set of binoculars or whatever, or like a telescope, right? So you have, if tantric practice is like a telescope, right? You as tantrika have built a tube to look at things at a distance, and like by looking at those things from a distance, like you're able to shut out all of these other things that are distracting you, right? But unless you have the lenses that are provided by the guru, you don't see them clearly.
Okay. I mean, I guess that kind of makes sense. It's very much, I guess the closest thing I can kind of put that with is a lot of like oral tradition, where you can read a book about, you know, Haitian voodoo, for example, right? But you are not going to get the missing pieces because Haitian voodoo is an oral tradition. It is passed down orally.
Right.
You can read, you know, some ethnography about it, but you're not going to have a full picture of what it is you are reading about.
Could I propose another idea here about, like, yeah, if there's no, like, good and bad, again, we're dealing with maybe a restriction of language again, but something that might be considered bad, for lack of any other better word, is not recognizing the universality, as Yara was discussing earlier, or like somehow separating yourself from it, and that's something that can come from, you know, different aspects of one's ego and things like that, which maybe it doesn't really mesh with the true practice. Would that?
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's coming down to that bastard ego again. Yeah, ruining everything. No, that actually does kind of, that really makes a lot of sense, because one of the ways that kind of like the idea of breaking down good and bad, right, is, okay, if I'm going to use the word God here, right, to you know, substitute in the universe or creation or whatever word works for you, right? In the idea of like a non-dualistic nature, God is the tsunami and God is the relief. Like, they're both the same thing. You can't separate them, right?
Right.
Like,
yeah.
You know, God is the firefighters that went in and saved a bunch of people on 9/11. God is also the planes that hit the fucking towers. And also the towers. And also everything, right? And in that way, you can't, like, how do you separate that? And that's what I was talking about earlier with, like, we are so inherently limited by our language to have even, like, to start discussing, you know, some of these deeper practices and, like, deeper ideologies. It's so hard to break that down, because how do you break down something that can't be broken down? And
I think it's more than just language. It's also like the culture that we live in the West. It being so inherently individualistic. So we see ourselves as an individual rather than a part of a greater whole, which a lot of social problems can be broken down in that way, where it's like, you know, why should I worry about this other person when I have to take care of myself? But you need to look at the bigger picture and realize, you know, the health of the other person is the health of the society and therefore myself. And so, like, it's not just language, but it's also this individual mindset and everything. And you have to basically shift your own perspective into realizing that everything is interconnected. And with everything being interconnected, like, that's where, like, it has this very like grandiose effect towards magic, because then, like, since everything is interconnected, everything I therefore do has an effect on everything else. And so through ritual, through practices, through meditation and understanding, you're able to inflict change upon that environment.
There, again, to kind of like bring it back to something I'm a little more familiar with, not to constantly be that guy, but there's a concept in Zen where you view existence and you view the collective as like a wave, right? Like a waveform. So you and I are not two separate things. We are two peaks on a wave, and we cannot see the thing underneath that connects us. Right?
Right.
Yeah.
All right, cool.
And like one thing that I would like to say though is one of the reasons that I wanted to do this episode on Tantra so much is especially right after the sex magic episode, is because in the West there's also that misconception of just like taking Tantra, and most people when they hear Tantra they just don't automatically assume tantric sex practices.
Oh yeah, they it's immediately like 10-hour orgasm, like
right.
That's dumb.
Yeah, and one of the things with Tantra though is unless that practice has like, and like I hate this word, has like a holistic approach, like it's not Tantra.
Yeah, no, and like again, and we talked about this with on the Lux Occult podcast. The idea of like holistic is kind of a triggering word because a lot of people look at it and they immediately think of like these like fucking
hippies,
homeopathic wackadoos.
Yeah.
That like are like, oh, you're sick, you've got lead poisoning, here, have this arsenic, that'll fix it. That's not what holistic means. Holistic literally means you're looking at the entire thing.
Yeah.
Right? You're not just looking at, like, you can't just go diving into Tantra and, like, oh yeah, I want to fuck for 9 hours, right? All you're doing is, like, you're creating a disservice, right? By not looking at the entire thing. It's the same thing as people looking at, like, conjure or hoodoo and being like, hey, I want to make a voodoo doll. Like, okay, I guess, but like
there's so much more to it. It's change, like we had previously discussed. It's an entire perspective change. It is a completely different way of approaching reality.
Yeah, and not only that, you make yourself look like an asshole to boot. Yeah, there's that. Which it's actually kind of interesting, like thinking about it now. That's a common thing between like voodoo and Tantra, is that voodoo also kind of has this idea that there really isn't evil. Mm-hmm. There's necessary and unnecessary, but there isn't evil. You do what you have to do. You do what is necessary.
Right. But, and this just comes to mind, like, how does one, as a chaos magician in particular, who, like, I mean, let's be honest here. We just pick and choose what we want to practice. Like, if something doesn't work for us, we don't do it. We just abandon it. There's kind of like a dissonance here, like, with an all-encompassing world view and how you perceive things. Could you still consider yourself a chaos magician by moving forward and completely changing your entire outlook on everything and not abandoning everything?
Yes.
So, yeah, well, obviously, yes, I'm going to say yes. But, in, like, I don't think that it is doing necessarily a disservice, because like, you can be a chaos magician and just like, you know, go balls out into Tantra for like a year or two and learn, like, do nothing but Tantra, do nothing but tantric practices, like, do your fucking meditations, say your mantras, like, practice mandalas, all of this shit, all of these different practices, and then, like, say a year or two down the road, you're just like, something else is more interesting to me, and then move on to that. But by doing those tantric practices, it's going to fundamentally change who you are as a person. And so I think there's very much, even like with like this common misunderstanding of chaos magicians, where we're just like, oh, I want that, and I want that, and fuck all of your other rules and shit. Like, yes, sort of, but at the same time, we can still do things like with extreme dedication and still follow things like all the way through.
I want to put a pin in that because I have thoughts and opinions. But before I start like white duding all over the white dudeness of white dudedom, Cologne, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that. The idea of like, can you dive all the way into something and still be a chaos magician?
I mean, from my perspective, I don't see why not. I mean, isn't that the point of chaos magic, is that you can, work with something for as long you need to, and, get from it what is going to be helpful. And if it's, a good tool for you and it's working for you. And I'd also would argue that, to be frank, like, throughout this podcast and all my other studies, there isn't anything I haven't done that hasn't changed me as a person somehow, changed my perspective on how I practice, changed my perspective on myself or the world. Like, it's going to happen. If you're not changing, what's the point of doing magic at all? Because isn't that really the point?
Yeah.
No, I think that's really poignant, I feel like the goal of a chaos magician should always be to grow and should always be to change, right? With that being said, there is no rule that says that you cannot be a chaos magician and also an asshole, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
and I've said this before, and I don't think it's like the commonly held belief necessarily on especially on this show. But, like, chaos magic is the magic of appropriation, right? You, as a chaos magician, that is what you're doing, and you need to accept that on some level, you are appropriating other cultures. And by doing that, right, it is your job to pay that culture the respect that it deserves, right? It is your job, it is your responsibility as a chaos magician, even if you go into Tantra and you decide that only one or two things works for you, right? Like the breathing technique is cool, and, a couple other little tidbits here and there that you pick up, right? It is your job, it is your responsibility as a chaos magician to learn about as much of that ideology as you can. You need to be an information sponge and soak up every little bit that you can, because you're not going to know what's useful. You're not going to know what improves your practice and improves you as a magician and as a person unless you experience it, right? So, yeah, you could go into Tantra and like, your goal going into Tantra is like, I want to have better orgasms. You can be that asshole. You're allowed to be that asshole. Nobody has to, like, think you're a good person still. But also, you owe it to yourself, you owe it to the culture, and you owe it to, like, your community, your friends and the people around you to, like, learn about this shit.
No, definitely. And one thing that I'd like to add on to that is going back towards like the beginning of this episode, where you said it was kind of like a punk rock approach to mysticism. Essentially, that's what Tantra was when it started off, because it's starting within the Hindu culture, or which that's, I still really don't like the word Hindu or Hinduism, because that's basically just that's white people word. Because like we had, like, it was, the entire thing was like, okay, so India is a subcontinent. It is a fucking huge amount of land. And you had all of these disparate religions, all practicing and worshiping different deities. Like, you have fucking Vishnu, and you have Ganesha, and all of these other ones, except they all respected and, saw these other deities as like someone who just worships Ganesha. He saw Vishnu over there. He's like, yeah, that's cool. He's cool. He hangs out with my buddy, but primarily I'm just worshiping this guy here. And they were all disparate religions until white people came over in the 19th century, and they're like, oh, so this is all just Hinduism, right? Like, no? Well, that's what we're going to call it.
You're Indians. Like,
yeah.
It's very that.
Yeah, but that culture still had the whole caste system and everything, right? And, like, when you were born and where you were born, you were stuck in that caste forever, the end. Like, that's what you were. Next. But with Tantra, it was basically everyone's a Brahmin now. Everyone is, like, the highest caste because everyone is equal. Everyone is a representation of the ultimate. Like, we all have consciousness. Consciousness is God, and then there's creation, which is also God, so we're all God. Your caste system's dumb. And so, like, it was kind of like a revolutionary thought that this caste system is dumb, but that's also why they took in and started, or one of the practices within Tantra is, well, within some schools of Tantra is, like, practicing and consuming taboo things. Like eating meat, or drinking alcohol, or all of this other shit, because, I mean, I'm God, and, like, I made this, I guess, so I can do whatever. Everything's equal.
Okay. And I guess, to pivot to kind of the last talking point that I have before we get into the interview, I'm interested in everybody's kind of opinion on this. And I'm also interested to come back and revisit this talking point after we do, the month of this episode and then into the next one. Do you think that Tantra is inherently magic?
Yes. Yes, I do. Like, Tantra is inherently magical because it is changed, like, it's practices and a viewpoint that is it changes your perspective on everything, and knowing that you are consciousness that can change, that as a flip side created creation, by changing your consciousness you can therefore change creation. By doing certain practices, by doing these tantric practices, you can thus change the outcome and change what you want, change what you desire, and change overall everything around you. So, yes, I believe that Tantra in and of itself is inherently magical, because it's kind of like how in earlier episodes we talked about how just by practicing magic every day, you start getting into a magical mindset where therefore everything you do is magic. It's another, like, approach to that.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. Cologne, what do you think?
My opinion's pretty similar to Yara there. I have a pretty broad, personal definition of magic, and if going with the more basic one where people say magic is just putting forth your will into reality, trying to change it, then yeah, for certain, Tantra, especially as we've discussed here, is that. I usually think of magic as also a change of consciousness, whether it's yours or other people's, and clearly Tantra, as doing that as well when practiced properly. So, yeah, I agree with Yara.
Okay. Yeah, for sure. I'm gonna kind of go at this from a different way. And, like, I'm going to say that for the same reasons, and, like, just hear me out on this before you lambast me, because I'm pretty sure I'm wrong about it. But for the same reasons that, like, the Kabbalah, or, like, the act of meditation is not inherently magical, right? for that same reason, I am going to hypothesize that the practice of Tantra is not inherently magical. However, it is fundamental to your growth as a magician. Right? The same way that, like, meditation is. Meditation is the building blocks of magic. Meditation in and of itself is not inherently magical. I am intending to put this to the test over the next 30 days until we, do the next episode, to come back and, like, be able to have a better opinion one way or the other about it. I'm also, for the record, I'm putting this out there. I don't want to, like, say, like, oh, I'm playing devil's advocate, because that's kind of fucking stupid, and I hate it when people do that. But I'm separating the practice from the ideology, which is not something that should be done in Tantra, right?
Right. Okay, at
Gotcha.
least you added that, because the first thing that came to mind was like, well, now you're just approaching it from a dualistic perspective, so yeah, that's completely antithetical to what Tantra is.
Yeah, and like, so the point being, right, to kind of bring it back home, the point being is I am approaching Tantra the same way that I would approach any other new ideology, right?
Fair.
I can only approach it with the understanding that I have now, right?
Right.
And in doing so, I only am able to look at things separately, in the sense of, like, there's the practice and there's the theory, right? And that you get into that with, like, the Kabbalah as well, right? There's, like, the practice and there's the theory. You get into that with meditation. There's practice and there's the theory, right? Mm-hmm. The goal of Tantra, to my understanding, is to eliminate that separation.
Okay.
Right? So, what I'm saying is I'm putting myself to this because I have far and away the least amount of experience with Tantra. Okay. Is to put that to the test over the next 30 days, or until we do our next episode, and see where I come out on the other side, right? And I think that part of the reason I want to do this is because, like, yeah, we typically do the assignments or the quests or the homework for Cologne, but as a chaos magician, your job is always to grow, right? I'm not done learning. I'm not done experiencing new stuff. So, like, I'm gonna do this too. And I think everybody should.
Kick ass.
Oh, go
I
ahead.
have a quick question for you there, Dreadnought. Like, when you're talking about, like, the difference between something that's inherently magical and something that isn't, I couldn't help but think do you think the relationship has anything to do with, like, the intent of the practice? Like, when meditation comes, like, it's a tool for magic, but it's not inherently magical until you're using it for a particular intent. Do you think that's true? I guess it's something that I just came up to my mind when you were talking.
I think that's definitely a way of looking at it, right? And the example I would give for that is a sigil, right? The creation of a sigil is inherently magical, because, and intent does play into that, right? You are doing a thing with a result in mind, like you have a goal that you want to achieve, and you are doing something that is, at least as far as your ego is concerned, not directly related to it, right? Like, I'm gonna make a sigil because I want an extra $100 this month, or whatever it is. But I'm not gonna go work a second job to get that $100. I'm gonna make a sigil for it, versus something like, I'm thirsty, I want a drink of water, I'm going to get up, go to the sink, get a cup of water, and drink it. That's not an inherently magical act unless you view it magically.
Okay.
Fair enough. It kind of seems like, it's just approaching it like, no, it's magic. It's just magic with extra steps.
Which part?
Just like, creating a sigil versus actually getting up and going to do the thing.
Yeah, I'm doing an act of magic by making a sigil for $100 because I don't want to work 10 hours.
Yeah.
Like that's like a very base example of, like, results magic, right?
Yeah.
I think, like, for me, that is the difference between something being inherently magical versus like you viewing something as being magical.
Gotcha.
Right.
Fair enough.
And again, that's me stating my own opinion about something, and it's also me setting down kind of like a benchmark to come back to in 30 days and see how my thought process, how my opinion, how my experience has changed.
Right.
All right. I'm real excited. I don't want to stall anymore. I want to get to this interview. So, Yara, you did this interview earlier.
Yes.
I want you to go ahead and introduce it.
Okay, so for this interview, I had interviewed a dude named Francis, who is a teacher over at BuddhistGeeks.com. He has been a practicing tantrika for I think a decade now or something like that, and he started off a lot like we did, and just like learning shit online. And he went into like all of these different like message boards and shit like that, and just started reading books and doing whatever before he actually found a guru and started learning Tantra the traditional manner of learning under a guru, reading all of these tantric texts and shit and incorporating into his life. He is a chaos magician as well. He considers himself one. And so has worked in a lot of different paradigms and what have you. But yeah, he is officially a teacher for Buddhism and at BuddhistGeeks.com. But as I had said, because of the Buddhism, he does slightly approach Tantra from a different way, since my basis is in Shaiva Shakti. But there are underlying, fundamentals behind both of them, and he does an excellent job of, breaking shit down.
Well, let's fucking waste no time. Let's get into this. I'm super, super fucking excited.
We'd like to take this time to acknowledge our partnership with our sponsor, Welcome to Paradise. Not only do they carry occult and ritual items that have been personally vetted and created by practicing occultists, they've partnered up with the Faithblind Council to provide you with exclusive offerings from your hosts. Tarot consultations by Dreadnought, hand-carved leather by Cologne, and custom talismans from Yaramarud are just a few of the items sold by Welcome to Paradise in their collection of occult artists. If you're a magical artist looking for a place to showcase your goods, why not join the Paradise team? Whether it's to sell your work or to add another piece to your collection, please visit our sponsors at welcometoparadise.com.
Okay, it's Frater Yaramarud here, and I am here with Francis, who is here to instruct us in the ways of Tantra. Would you like to introduce yourself, Francis?
Yeah, I can. Well, just want to start. I'm not authorized in any way to instruct anyone in the way of Tantra. So, in a way, I'm kind of speaking above my pay grade here. But I'm just more. I'm going to share more about my experience with engaging with Tantra, and I'm a long-time practitioner, and now I'm also a Dharma teacher as part of the Buddhist Geeks, and I have a regular life outside of that, regular work, and that's
No, it sounds good. I mean, you know more about Tantra than I could ever feel like greatly comfortable instructing other people in it. And this is an episode that we were happy to cover now, especially because it's such, like, to practitioners in the West, the word Tantra is very much a nebulous term. So could you give us, like, your definition of what Tantra is?
Yeah. So, Tantra is like, it's nebulous for a reason. It covers a lot of ground, most people in the West usually will have an association with tantric sex, which is kind of a Western unbundling of practices that have something related to Tantra. But Tantra is really to me, Tantra is really also the mysticism category. It's a mystical practice, which appears historically around a few hundred years in the Common Era in India, and it's of course like it's many invented tradition. It has roots with the past and being transmitted, but we see the first tantra, which are a way to weave documents written that starts to appear 400, something like that. Check on Wikipedia, early, around 500 CE, and in India, and it appears in Hinduism, or what we call Hinduism, in Buddhism, and I've read also that it also appears in Jainism, and it spread from there. And what its characteristics about Tantra is that it is it's linked to the Indian spiritual nebula, but what the difference there is that it was kind of a way of practicing outside of the caste system, and the essential characteristics of Tantra, which works across all of most of these difference, is that it's a non-renunciate tradition. So whereas many of the original Buddhism or Hinduism is kind of, there is a renunciation of life, moving away from the world, that sort of thing. The Tantric tradition is that spiritual. There's no difference between the spiritual and the mundane. In that way, it's kind of a fusing of that, and you have like adept practitioners who are in the Tantra literature. Often there's called the Mahasiddhas, the great adepts, and each of these different Tantric tradition will have it's 84. I don't know why. There's always 84 Mahasiddhas, and they're different from tradition to tradition. So it's not like there's 84 that we find all across the place, but the form of 84 comes back across tradition with a lot of variations in which adepts are there. And these adepts are, they're not monks. Usually they're like hunters, robbers, murderers, merchants, prostitutes, dancers. So it's all in like lay person, and so it's kind of a worldly mystical path, and that's the gist of it. Yeah, and then it goes in various traditions, and you'll find like a lot of differences in the practice, but at the most like common levels, it's like worldly mysticism.
From what I understand, and as you kind of mentioned, there are different schools of Tantra. And so the one that I'm most familiar with is Shiva Shakti school of mysticism. Which one would you say that you follow, since you did say that you are a Dharma teacher?
Yeah. I put myself, the lineage I'm in is like the Vajrayana, so it's kind of Buddhist Tantra. But when I started a long time ago, it was actually, when I started my first mystic practice, if you want, was in a Hindu tradition, which was Sri Vidya, which is Shiva Shakti type of metaphysics or worldview. So I started in that, and then when I discovered Buddhism over probably 7 years ago, and discovered that the Buddhists knew a lot about meditation and that sort of practice, and then explored like the Tantric aspect of Buddhism. So yeah, and that's more where the framing I use for my practice now.
Okay, awesome. So let's get into some of the listener questions we have. The first one we have would be, what interested you in this tantric path in the first place?
Yeah, so I mean, it's the non-renunciate aspect. When I started on the path, I I mean, I eventually encountered yoga and meditation as a way. I mean, basically, it started with like a mystical experience, which kind of couldn't put into any category. That was a hardcore scientific materialist, and it kind of this is bigger than this paradigm. And started looking. I mean, it involved this experience involved like cannabis and self hypnosis, and so started like okay, it was kind of okay, this is an experience which linked to. I had a feeling like, okay, this is probably what I've heard about yoga and yogis and that sort of thing. And so started from there, and then eventually landed on this serendipity on a website which was about like Himalayan yoga tradition, which was mixing yoga, the Yoga Sutras, the Tantra, and Advaita. And so it was, even though there was it was a monk and there was kind of a renunciation in life, so it was part of that. There was still the fact that no, you don't need to renunciation or become a monk to practice this path. So that was something. I mean, I had a long time partner and work, and so it was kind of okay. I have a mystical calling, but I don't want to renounce the world.
Yeah, you don't want to throw everything that you've worked so hard for away. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So that was the draw, and then when exploring Buddhism, rediscovering like the Tantric tradition, which was also kind of the same framing. So to me, that's always been important that mystical practice, it doesn't create a split between the mystical and the mundane.
Okay. And so would you say that starting work within a tantric path, is it easy to do or is it difficult?
Both. It is. So here going more into like I like very much the clarity, that conceptual clarity that I found in the Nyingma tradition. Nyingma is this is this is from Tibetan Buddhism, and it's the old school in a way. So Tantra Buddhism came to Tibet in two waves. The first wave, and then it disappeared for 200 years, 300 years, and then it came again. And in the first wave, it had like both like the renunciate and the tantric tradition, lay yogi practicing. So and it's called the old translation of Nyingma. And from the Nyingma perspective, the tantric teachings, it's kind of there are three vehicles of Buddhism. So there's the sutra, tantra, and Dzogchen, which is part of Tantra, but a different perspective. And the path of Tantra is, so each of these is a system of practice which is self-consistent, and it's not like there's one better than the other, even though I mean there is chauvinism in both traditions.
Right.
My way is necessarily better than the others. But anyway, and from that perspective, they say that each of these system of practice has a prerequisite. There's a base, and then there's a path, which are the methods that you use and get the results. So the path of Tantra starts at, it says that the base is emptiness. This is from Buddhist perspective. The Hinduism actually probably presented differently. But the idea there is that, so it requires whereas the path of Sutra, it's the base is dissatisfaction with the world, and the path of Sutra is renunciation. So if you are dissatisfied with the world, you can practice Sutra. You renounce the world, and then you get eventually the result of that is emptiness. Which I mean, what does that mean? To me, here, I think that the better emptiness is just kind of this nihilistic quality of experience. So I mean, I think that's a good pointer, and some comfort with that. The fact that every time we think there's something, well, it will change, and we have all these clear categories, but at the periphery of these categories, there's always dualistic in all experience, and usually we kind of don't like that. So to practice Tantra, you actually need to get some comfort and to be able to practice Tantra, which is the method of Tantra from that perspective is not renunciation, it's transformation. So it's kind of things moving, it's very active and requires engagement. And so to practice Tantra from that perspective, if you start and you don't have the base, then it's difficult. So that's why in Buddhism, most Tantric school will they are like the preliminary. So if you go to many Tantric traditions, they will give you, okay, you start, here's the initiation, and then you do like you have a set of practices which have a taste or like the structure and the shape of what is the Tantric practice. And the goal of these practices are to bring you to the base of the path. So, but at first it's kind of it's hard because the path it's not there. So, but to start, concretely, it's basically find a practice that is aligned with what you're looking and that sort of thing, and then start practicing. So like I said, I mean, personally, how I started, I found this website, this is how you meditate, and this is how you start, and follow the instructions, apply that, and went from there. So,
it's kind of, so what I'm getting is it's kind of simple to actually start learning shit, but it's really difficult actually like incorporating that into your life and starting to take these really big concepts and start applying them.
It's tricky. There's I mean, depends on everybody's experience and people. For instance, there's previous life experience, which makes approaching that type of practice more easy for certain people, more harder, and that's why there are multiple, in the field of just Buddhist practice. There are like hundreds of different techniques and teachings, and each of them are valid in a certain context. So.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the next question is that there seems to be a great emphasis on the teacher-student relationship, particularly within Tibetan Buddhism. And given that we live in the modern world where we have access to a plethora of books, videos, online communities, and teachings from a variety of masters, is the concept of being a solo or remote practitioner more viable than ever before?
I mean, this is a very important question. And first, the student, I mean, it's more than the student teacher relationship in traditional Tantra. I mean, it's the teacher talking to the guru. It's kind of which, I mean, has all sorts of association in our world. I mean, negative usually. You don't. I mean, there's a lot of documentaries on cult with really bad, and in Buddhism, Hinduism, across all traditions, and it's true now that most of the teachings have been written down and are accessible. Many are translated, so there's a lot that we can learn from as a solo. So being a solo practitioner is possible. It doesn't mean that it's a good idea. and my experience has been so I've been a solo practitioner for over 10 years in a way. I mean, not totally solo, because when I started this website, there was a forum and the guy who was writing it was answering for a few years. So there was some interaction, and I eventually went to meet him. And the trick is that actually meeting somebody who is experienced in that type of practice is essential to progress on the perspective, because otherwise we're just living with our projections, our idealization, and I mean, it's like, I mean, there's this saying, you know, you go to therapy to learn what everybody around you knows about yourself.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's the same thing here. Is that the teacher there is kind of a real. I mean, this is real. You know, this is somebody who has did this practice and got, you know, either an adept at it, ideally, and so you can look what it looks like, you know, and it undercuts working with a teacher, a mentor helps undercut a lot of projections and idealization, that sort of thing. Like I said, and then when I started working with geeks, having like real regular conversation with teachers who are not, I mean, in the Tantric tradition, but still, that was, it kind of first validates a lot of the thing. Okay, because otherwise it depends on how we're done, but basically our delusions, we get caught in that, you know, so it's kind of, okay, is this genuine? Did I imagine that? Is this real? And all of that shit, where when you talk with someone who's been there, and, oh yeah, no, yeah, I get this happens, you know, this is, okay, and so it's there are two things. So you can, if you're a solo practitioner, at the very least find a group of peers who are in the same thing, so that there's some, you can share experience, validate experience, and ideally, you know, find some mentors who have like more experience than you can bring perspective. And then the part of the method of Tantra is actually having like a very close relationship with the teacher, and in a way where which will, you know, push us or challenge us and that sort of thing, which is where, you know, we hear all these stories of crazy teachers asking crazy things to their students, and it can get messy. So, you know, in a way, before traditionally it's said, for instance, that before committing to your teacher, you should, you know them and have worked with them for 7 to 10 years, which is what most people won't do here.
Yeah, yeah.
But that's because in traditional, when you make your vow to your teacher, which is called Sanaya in Sanskrit, it's serious shit, you know.
Yeah.
And so if you want to take this seriously, yeah, it's like, you know, I mean, it's like marriage in a way. You want to know the person before committing for life, even though that's not how we usually think of it now. But I mean, there is taking it seriously as, okay, no, I'm going to make this forward. Why? It's actually create all sorts of problems for us. You know, in a way, it's that the vow you take, it's impossible to take the vows and uphold the vows. You're going to break it, and breaking it, creating all sorts of knots, is part of what creates the pressure, the drive to actually change, create, and so that's why you find a mentor, a teacher, and if you want to commit really to that path, well, you know, take your time.
Yeah, well, and
that's probably not strictly necessary, I think, but yeah.
Well, one thing one of the things that I understand with Tantra is it's necessary to have a guru or a mentor for the reason that it provides a kind of check and balance. So there's your own consciousness and what you're going through, then there's your mentor, and then there's the tantric texts. And so from your interpretation of the text, you're able to like let the guru know, like, okay, this is what I came about it, and they can tell you whether or not, oh yeah, you're on the right path, or you're full of shit, you need to go over that again. So it kind of like the purpose of the guru is to kind of like help steer you in a way that you're not going to go off and just misinterpret a whole bunch of shit.
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
But this is, I mean, you get that also from any, you know, spiritual mentor. I mean, they can check their experience, that sort of thing. The traditionally, I mean, there's something more also, and this is not, I mean, you don't need the guru relationship for that, although it's part of it, which is because it's said in a way there's an old method to, and one of the method which is often in many tantric tradition is the guru yoga, which is guru yoga is in a similar. You find a similar idea in when Crowley, Aleister Crowley, was talking about, going about all interaction with reality as the divine messing with you. So in a way, the guru is the personification of that, and the guru. So you see your guru as the Buddha, or an enlightened being, and also they see that in you. So it's kind of, in a way, they see the potential, the realization. They see you as this, able to see you as this enlightened person, or as a source of enlightened activity, and bring that forward. So they can, and so there's an evaluation and a dialectic game happening there, which is part of the method.
Okay.
And yeah, and it's very much about, and yeah, so yeah, some David Chapman compares the analog we have in Western culture is often the relationship we have with people doing PhD with the thesis advisor, and you get into their thing.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, the next question, if you could give your thoughts on left-hand path and right-hand path from a tantric perspective.
Yeah, so this is, I don't know if this, I've never really encountered that in the Buddhist Tantra, but when I started, it was very much part of the Himalayan tradition, which is that, and from that perspective, the way they were framing that is that the left-hand path is I mean, and this was a right-hand path track, so
yeah,
there's always a bias in there.
Right.
The way they were presenting it is that the right-hand path takes the text, and because in Tantra you don't renounce, there's nothing impure. There's no purity in purity. That doesn't part really with the view.
Mm-hmm.
All things are pure. So poisons, alcohol, meats in Hinduism, which are kind of taboo, you would be incorporated in the path. So and this is where like you have the feast, and you eat meat, you have sex, drink, that sort of thing. And so the left-hand path, from that view, the left-hand path is you do that, literally. The right-hand path, you do that symbolically, and it's more internal. So it in a way, it could be said that left-hand path is, I mean, that the right-hand path is kind of a practicing Tantra in a renunciate compatible.
Okay.
Container.
Yeah.
Whereas the left-hand path is there's less difference there. But and one thing we have to know also, so going from the Buddhist tradition, most of Tantra, the Buddhist Tantra we encounter now, is actually practiced in a renunciative context. I mean, the Dalai Lama and the Gelug school have tantric preachings, but Gelug is a monastic tradition. So there is and often the view is more of Mahayana, which is also like a renunciative tradition. So the tantric methods and techniques are kind of explained in a renunciative view. So that's why, I mean, from a renunciative view, okay, yes, everything is pure and that sort of thing, but we will, I mean, we won't drink alcohol, we will
Yeah.
Symbolize it and things like that.
Everything's pure, but we're just not going to do that.
Yeah.
Okay. So what techniques would you have for meditation and visualization that are used in Tantra?
The scope is...
Yeah, it's a big question.
So the thing that, and it will depend on the tradition. There are things that are pretty, often associated. So one of them is Guru Yoga or Yidam, which is kind of that particular case of Yidam practice, which is Yidam is from, I don't know how it's called, Deity Yoga or thing like that. So from from the point of view of the chaos magic, 5 operations, it's kind of an evocation and an invocation for the aim of illumination.
Okay.
You get initiated in the Yidam, which is a particular, from Buddhist point of view, enlightened, being, and you will practice. Then you enter a sadhana, which is like a regular practice where you will visualize the Yidam, the deity, either externally or externally at first. So evocation before recognizing yourself as the Yidam. So there's a visualization of the ideal, and there's a mantra, and there is it's pretty much with all the details
right,
that
yeah,
you can add around that, and that this is the kind of a practice that, unlike say chaos magic, you do a ritual around that. It's something actually, even though you engage every day, there's like a formal period of practice. When you leave your formal practice, you maintain that. The idea is like to live from that perspective throughout the day, to go along your business showing up as this enlightened being, so that's kind of this is something that's very tantric, but then there's again, this is from the Igma. There's 9 different vehicles and the tantras and the inner tantras, which are usually what we think. There's Maha Yoga, which is more ritual based. So practice in there would be like fire offering or singing or creating like crafts, and these all could be practices. From the Anu Yoga perspective, this is more like all the energetic style of practices. So, and this is a lot like what has been unbundled and brought about in Tantric sex, so-called, where this is with the chakra visualization of like feeling of the subtle body, energetic energies in the body, and working with that. And then you have Ati Yoga, which is in a way very formless. Kind of there's nothing to do, just being present,
yeah,
and embodying, spontaneous enlightened activity, which is like expressing wisdom and compassion.
Mm-hmm.
And the techniques with that would be more about, standard, what looks like meditation, but more expensive, and all sorts of things. So it's very wide. And why it's very wide is because it depends. There's a lot of emphasis on individuation and personalities, because personalities is not something, the goal of Tantra is not to make robots of everybody the same. It's more about like, okay, what does, enlightened Fratera Yaramud looks like?
Yeah.
Which is not going to look like Padmasambhava or Shakyamuni or, even your teacher.
Right.
Even though we always take from the people, so that's why you want to watch your teacher, because you're going to be a little like them.
Yeah.
So is that
right?
Is that something you want? so yes, it's very varied, and that's why I mean having a teacher is important because they engage with your personality, with your makeup, and then can suggest, oh, you should try that technique, or you should try that practice now, things like that, because they kind of know you and can make suggestions. If you're a solo practitioner, well, you have to try and see what really engages you, and you're willing to, oh no, I can do this for 3 years.
Yeah.
or more.
Right. Okay. What is a yantra, and is it similar to a sigil?
Yes. So, yantra, you find that especially in the Hindu tradition. In the Buddhist tradition, they call it often the mandala, and it's slightly different. So it's not a sigil in the sense that this is usually falls in the deity yoga type of practice. So each deity has a yantra. This in the perspective, and the yantra is like the mantra is the deity. So it's kind of so it's kind of it's part of the form of the being you're recognizing yourself as. From the more Buddhist perspective, it's we call it a mandala, and the mandala is kind of the worldly expression of the deity. So what that means is that if I'm practicing Deity yoga, and then so I see myself as the yidam, and everything around me as the mandala of the yidam.
Okay.
So it's kind of everything, and the symbolic. So I mean the symbols has meaning and things like that, so you can recognize, or okay, this is the the element of water arising, and so that's the purpose of the mandala. Mandala practice is more kind of a Alan Chapman has something called cosmology practice. I don't know if you, which has similar aspect of that. It's kind of from that, what am I seeing, and that's the mandala. That's the cosmos around.
Yeah.
And and again, there's no separation between the deity and their mandala, so it keeps that contact. So yeah, it's called. I mean, this is called like maintaining pure vision. So you're seeing you're interacting with reality as the mandala of the
Okay, I mean, so it would kind of be a sigil in the aspect that it's a representation of them.
Yes, the little squiggly drawing.
Yeah.
Is from that. Yeah. But what it represents is not an intention, but a cosmos.
Right. Yeah.
That's
okay.
the difference.
So yeah, it's not an intention. It's just them. It's that being, or that.
And the all of reality.
Yeah.
Which is that being also.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, what tips would you have on staying focused on your path and practice despite all of the negativity with the news going around us and the pandemic and all of that?
That's also a very good question. So, I mean, this is tough.
Yeah. Yes, it's very difficult.
This is and much kindness to the person asking the question, because I mean, there's like I've seen a meme recently which was like regular anxiety,
Yeah.
just normal living anxiety, and then like living in a pandemic, election, and all of
Yeah.
global warming and everything.
We're living in a time of hella anxiety. Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting because from the Indian tradition of the yugas, the eras or the aeons, epoch, aeonics in gas magic, we live. I forgot how they call it. I mean, the worst. It's L.
Yeah.
The worst of the yugas, and Tantra is kind of a response to that. In a way, Tantric practice is very much adapted to the type of context we have. But so you don't need to focus. So it's hard, and practically, I mean, to ask the question, you really want to face yourself and take care and all of these common sense advice. But from the tantric perspective, the answer is slightly different. In the sense, I mean, you still want to take care of yourself. That's why.
Yeah.
Tantra is kind of a committed, hardcore path, So you need
Yeah.
to be able
Don't
to
fall
do that.
apart.
But the trick is that from the tantric view, I can say that it's not like there is only practice. So the negativity is part of the practice. It's kind of engaging, realizing how am I reacting, what's arising, and then engaging with that, and yeah. So it's not like, oh, I have to remove the negativity to focus on my path. It's kind of, okay, this negativity is arising. Well, and negativity is actually like dualist thinking. There's negativity versus positivity. Whereas from the tantric, and this is where like the base of emptiness is essential, because if you have that, I mean, if you're able to experience that texture, then it's kind of, okay, what I find very negative and is actually kind of spacious. There is space around it, and there's texture, so there's less reactivity. And well, okay, here there's still reactivity, but if there's reactivity from that perspective, it's because I'm trying to uphold like a point of reference and push away that. Whereas it's kind of, okay, I'm recognizing duality. There's negative, okay, there's positive, and then this is a polarity, and then engaging with that polarity. So yes, it is, and in this context, it's there's a whole pressure cooker. So it's great for practice, but it's also very hard. So.
Yeah. Within the Shiva Shakti tradition, and like what you had already kind of mentioned, the whole concept of everything is pure, within the Shiva Shakti, it's like that's still part of the divine, and so it's up to you to recognize, yeah, it's not necessarily quote unquote good, because everything's good. You just have to recognize where that quote unquote negativity fits in with everything else, and like with what's happening, what can you learn from it? And all, like, everything with that, like, there's this terrible thing that's happening. Well, how does that fit in with everything? Like, what is there to learn from that?
Yes, this is actually a good opportunity to make an important distinction between the more Hinduist Tantra and the Buddhist Tantra. So in the Hindu, I mean, what you said kind of jive with my understanding of the Hindu Tantra perspective. I'm always hesitating to say Hindu here.
Yeah.
It's Hindu is kind of an invention of the English.
Yes. Yeah.
So, and I don't. I mean,
that's why I hadn't necessarily said Shiva Shakti.
Exactly. But from that perspective, everything, like you said, everything is pure. Everything is the divine, and that style of Tantra is, from the Buddhist point of view, is actually what we call eternalist. It's kind of, everything is divine, everything has a meaning, and that meaning is there from all time. And I mean, this is like, there's a truth, capital truth, and things are. So this is very much the Hindu perspective. From the Buddhist perspective, especially, and this is very clear in the Enigma, which kind of, there is one thing which is avoiding what they call the four extremes, which is specific to Buddhism. And the four extremes are eternalism, and its opposite, nihilism. So eternalism is everything has meaning and it's fixed, and so there is meaning in this thing, this pandemic and all sorts of thing. And I mean, it's very similar to, this is an act of God, or what's God's will here. That's eternalist, the eternalist perspective. Nihilist perspective, we're very much familiar with as Westerners and scientific materialism. That no, there's no meaning.
Right. Yeah.
Nihilism is, there's no meaning. or that sort of
Yeah,
thing. And the other two extremes are monism and dualism. So monism is everything is one, so it's all divine, it's all the divine. Dualism is no, there are different things and that sort of thing.
Right.
So Shiva Shakti Tantra is very eternalistic in monism.
Yes.
Monist and dualistic. Whereas the Buddhist Tantra is actually all of these are true but partial, and false at the same time. Right? So
Right, yeah.
there is meaning, but it's not like totalizing. And things don't necessarily have meaning, but meaning exists.
Right, yeah, and that...
meanings, and it's also like, so it's not like everything is, we're all one, but we're not separate either. We're not all one and we're not all separate. So it's kind of non-separation, or everything is connected, but it's not the same as there's one big mush or divine.
Right, and that goes along well a lot with the whole Buddhist teaching of walking the middle path. So
yeah, exactly.
Right.
The four extremes is walking the middle path.
Yeah.
And the middle path is not staying in the middle. It's kind of you will, because there's a lot of elated state of that you can encounter, but they're not permanent. They pass, and they're not the truth. They're kind of what is true in this moment, but it will find a way. So from that perspective, engaging with, it's not like it's a method, So it's kind of, okay, this negativity that is arising. It's kind of, okay, how can I stop relating to it as something awful happening? What can I learn from it about myself, about my own, preventions, habit, where I try really to stand and make myself, like a solid reference point against which everything can be positioned and understood, and taking a little bit of or finding the space around that, and then rolling with it.
Yeah, just roll with it. Okay, the next question: do you use psychedelics in your practice?
Yes. So, like I said earlier.
It kind of stemmed from the cannabis use. Yeah.
So I relate psychedelics as non-human teachers.
Okay.
And this is not a conventional or traditional view at all. But personally, if it wasn't for psychedelics, I wouldn't be here in that format today.
Right, that's fair.
It's interesting though. I'm reading recently a book by Mike Crowley, which he's a Kagyu Lama. I think he's a Lama, but anyway, he's in the Kagyu, one of the Kagyu lineage, and he wrote secret books, secret drugs of Buddhism. And to him, the Tantric initiation is really on the format of the earlier Vedic initiation rite, which are where soma is at the this drug which nobody knew exactly what it is, and then it become in Buddhism Amrita. All Buddhist deity are holding like a skull of Amrita, and when in a Tantric initiation, usually there is Amrita involved, which is symbolic for a long time in most places, it seems. I'm not aware of any traditional lineage that use psychoactive substance as part of the initiation.
Yeah.
But originally, based on the iconography, how these are described, his theory, and from what he quotes, basically, probably the original Vedic soma was fly-agaric mushroom.
Right.
And then when it became in India, where there's not a lot of fly-agaric, it becomes psilocybin.
The psilocybin. Yeah.
Yeah, which grows on cow dung, which you had a lot of cow.
Yeah.
With the colors, also the imagery. So it's interesting, but like I said, this is not necessarily now. It's
just
not,
speculation.
It's speculation. Like I said, if you go and find traditional lineage, it's not going to be part of
right. Yeah.
the path. But
All right. Next question. Do you consider yourself a monk?
No, but it depends on what you take as a monk. Like I said, I think it's from renunciation. A monk to me implies renunciation, so no. At the same time, there is some characteristic of the monk which I could identify with, which is like the discipline, the commitment, that sort
Right.
of thing. But that would be it. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay, so what parts of the concepts of suffering and non-attachment what do those concepts play in with magical practice?
Yeah, so suffering and non-attachment are actually not important from the point of view of the tantric vehicle or the doctrine. And this is really the sutric path, where sutra Buddhism starts with the Four Noble Truths, which is the recognition that there is suffering, and there is an end to suffering, and there's a method to end the suffering. And that end, suffering is caused by clinging, attachment, often attachment. And so the method is, renounce clinging, and you'll be free of suffering, which is a totally valid path. But the method there is actually, whereas from the tantric perspective, the path is more about engagement. So, and then it's more about, okay, the clinging comes from the reference point. There's a reference point that you're trying to maintain. So that's what you want to loosen up around, find space. So yeah, and so it's interesting to magical practice. I mean, we've not like I said, the conversation is really more about like the mystical side of the practice, and but you find in Tantra a lot of, sorcery. There's many lamas or gurus who are also healers and will do like exorcise demons and all,
Right.
all what you expect from traditional. And in a way, historically, Tantra it seems to have been like a reintegration of the folk tradition. In Tibet, it was the Bon shamanic religion that kind of mixed with the Indian Buddhism to give like what became Indian Vajrayana. And there's probably other like similar things that happened, which gave Shiva Shakti and that sort of thing. So to me, I would make a link to the magical question, if you're doing magic, that suffering can be a good motivator, and a good source of, it's called, in the sutric vehicle, you get like, it's important to have right intention. And if your intention is to end suffering, it is right intention.
Yeah.
So this is kind of tapping into that for what are your intentions, what are the purpose of your working, that sort of thing. And attachment to me really points to like lust for results, in a way, which is
right.
So the more you're able to let go of what you want to accomplish, the end goal, the more the magic can flow.
Right. Okay. Okay, the next question. Do you find that paradigm shifting is difficult with using the noble truths?
No, because I don't use the four. that is a kind of short answer. But I think there is still something in there, because even though I don't work with the Four Noble Truths on a day-to-day basis, there is something about paradigm shifting, which is, in a way, paradigm shifting is easier from a tantric point of view, because it's kind of there is no fixed reference point. So paradigm shifting is possible, is easy. At the same time, there is still kind of the underlying. It would be very hard for me to to enter. I mean, it's not very hard, but and every time I'm entering a different paradigm, there is kind of a paradigm that are compatible with the fundamental view of the Tantric. And I say Tantric, but to me, my style of I practice. I mean, Tantra is really more from the Dzogchen and Hatha yoga point of view. So, which is even more spacious and allows, each of these paradigm is, I think, an arising and can be taken lightly, but this view of like form emptiness, this doing something outside of that would be hard because it is kind of a, in a way, I mean, Tantra is a totalizing practice.
Yeah.
You want to relate to everything from that perspective. So if you're shifting out of that, well, you're not doing Tantra anymore. And
Well, it's similar, like I had mentioned with the Shiva Shakti and how everything is divine. Like, if everything is divine, switching between a different paradigm is just like a different expression of the divine. So,
yes, but you're not letting go of the paradigm of everything is divine when we're doing that.
right, yeah.
So, there is a
Yeah.
yeah. So, yes.
Okay, do you have any tips for occultists?
It depends on the occultist, and what they want to practice and why they would want to engage in Tantra. So in a way, I'd say if you're not interested in mysticism, it's probably not that interesting. It becomes like shopping of techniques, and like we said earlier, all of these techniques are open, and
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I have no reason to believe that Buddhist sorcery is more powerful than
Right, yeah,
any
yeah.
other of what you can have an interest in. So, and otherwise, yeah.
Well, yeah, and I mean, with Tantra being as, like, big as it is, really, like, giving a tip to an occultist is really, like, is this something you want to dedicate a lot of time to? Like, because Tantra is more of a philosophical view of looking at the universe, and so, like, as a tip for an occultist, really, it's like, are you willing to shift the way you live your life forever? So it's like, Tantra is
But that's true of any practice you would engage with.
Right. That's true.
I mean, I think one thing is that don't expect this to be there's value in doing like monthly paradigm shifting, and there's value in doing like decades paradigm shifting.
Yeah.
Different experiences.
Right.
Different tastes. Yeah.
But yeah, like I've always perceived Tantra as more of like a philosophy than a big practice, really.
No, I wouldn't say that.
Okay.
Sure, I mean, you can relate to it as a philosophy, but then it's just a philosophy.
Right.
Whereas it is, to me, it's really kind of a practice.
Well, yeah. I mean, right. Like you enact that philosophy because it encompasses so much. Like, it can't do anything but affect how you live and how you practice.
Yeah, because I mean, in a way, if we want the diff of Tantra, is you live the view.
Yeah.
The view being this particular way of looking at experience and relating and engaging in relationships and with your engaging with your personality and the world, and the practice is living that view, and the view is a method, because it's not like this is the truth,
Right.
but it is, if you view and act and engage from that perspective, they are the results you can expect.
Right. I mean, like, when I say philosophy, I mean, yeah, practice is definitely going to be involved, because if it's your philosophy going along the Shiva Shakti line where everything is divine, that's definitely going to change your practice, because you're not going to be like a giant dickhead. Like, it's going to change your method of living your life. It's going to change how you practice because that philosophy has, like, intrinsically changed everything about you.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. If you don't, I'm kind of nitpicking on the philosophy word.
Yeah.
There is kind of very
Well,
disconnected from practice.
Yeah.
In Western culture, although there are philosophers now who are more about living philosophy.
Right.
I forgot the French author started that, saying like all of the Greek philosophy was not about ideas, but they were a way of living.
Yeah, I mean, we don't really have the right word in English for how I was approaching that, but like it's the way you think about the world, I guess, as philosophy, but it's going to absolutely change your method and practice.
Living philosophy, not academic philosophy.
Yeah, right. It's kind of like how we discuss all the time about, like armchair magicians versus people who actually do magic. Okay, so next question. Is it normal or common to incorporate Hindu gods into occult or magical practices like invoking or evoking?
Why not?
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, you had already mentioned the concept of, evoking and invoking the divine being of something and living your life accordingly, I suppose.
Yes, I mean, but from a more from a magical perspective, you can. I mean, there's always like personally like to approach divinities with respect on their traditional culture. So understanding where it comes, how this entity wants to relate, and you can do that with. I think if it's done with respect, any deities from any paradigm. If you want to do a ceremony to ask Kali to help you achieve evoke some of her qualities.
Yeah.
Crush it.
Yeah, just smash some shit.
I was more crushing. It was thinking crushing is destructive, although she is.
Yeah.
She can be, but that's totally fine. The difference, and this is again, like I said, the difference to me, and often in chaos magic, we do ritual invocations are kind of big deal. We really want this to be high energy, and the contrast between before the invocation, outside of the ritual, is kind of stark.
Yeah.
Whereas I'd say like the Tantric Deity, even though you can have these elated states and these big experiences, the feeling is more like microdosing than like the full.
Yeah.
Because it's something you want to maintain the whole day.
Yeah, the difference between microdosing and taking a 10 strip. Yeah, that's. And there was more to this question. It said that I've read about Agora and Tantra in the past and had what could be considered an arousal of Kundalini, and now I'm just getting into magic. It seems like Tantra is more particular and somewhat restrictive, whereas chaos magic is more freedom. So what are the possibilities? What possibilities could be done using Hindu gods in occult rituals? Which
the gods, all Indians. There are probably deities that are only worked with by Tantric practitioner, but otherwise all Hindu deities have like normal religious. They have powers, things that they can, and you can do a ceremony with them, like would be a ceremony. There's a lot of actual practice people petitioning, Lakshmi for wealth.
Yeah.
With that sort of thing, you can do that, and find like with any other. So, and at the same time, yes, chaos magic is pretty open, and what you can do with that sort of thing. Tantra, yes, it's more. The goal is more specified, and the method, even though there's a lot of flexibility. So, in a way, I think, like I said, invocation for illumination, that's the core. yeah, but it doesn't mean that you cannot petition these deities for, and even like people in the Buddhists, there's a lot of, services and gurus are doing for their communities, their lamas are doing for their communities. Okay, there's this person, they need that, and they will like give a donation to the ADF so that they do this mantra so that they get their
Right.
enchantment results and divination and for more mundane practice. But that's not why you engage in the tantric path.
Right. Okay. Next question. What is your opinion on working within systems created by people who were overall pieces of garbage? Crowley and Lovecraft, for example. Where do you draw the line?
Yeah, this is, I don't consider these systems as Tantra per se, but I think what I said earlier about being careful in choosing your teachers holds here. In a way, you can learn a lot from systems that are not, that have been, I think there is a difference between the individual, the system they produce, but it's not independent either. So yes, and you don't want to become your teacher. That's not the purpose either. But at the same time, it will rub on you. So.
Right, yeah. Well, and there's also the fact that the systems created by Crowley and Lovecraft, for example, they've been built on significantly since they were first created.
Yeah, exactly. And the teacher that is working with these systems now, they are probably different than founder systems.
Yeah. Okay, what are your thoughts on the Tantra episode of Netflix's Unwell series?
I haven't watched that, but I saw that this episode is actually called Tantric Sex, so, and I know that the series is looking into the dark side of the wellness industry, so, yeah, I don't really have much to say. Like I said, I didn't watch it, but what I said earlier about tantric sex being this an unbundling of some, because from tantra, and there are path and lineage, which is I think karma yoga. Karma is desire, that, but which is working with sexual energy and all of that, because that's part of life. So you can integrate that spiritual practice, and that is what has been like unbundled from the old constellation and became sold and marketed here as tantric sex, which doing great for a lot of people.
Yeah, there was this one thing that I had read in discussing tantric sex, and it had basically said, since tantra is such a life enveloping thing, you can't claim anything as tantric unless it involves that on a larger scale. So if you're just doing tantric sex for the sake of, getting off or increasing your pleasure or whatever, like, it's not actually tantra because it's not incorporated with the rest of your life. And then the last question we have is, like many other spiritual practices, Tantra has been co-opted by grifters looking for power, money, and sex. Which, yeah, that's, can you list off legit teachers or resources for those interested in exploring Tantra?
Yeah, that's true. And like I said, you want to be careful in choosing. And this has, to be honest, that has been a big reason why it took me so long to start working closely with teachers, because it's kind of, I'm picky.
Well, there was another thing that I had read in regards to it that I really liked, and it said, because Tantra is so powerful and can create so much in your life, like, if you don't follow it the right way, if you start off being a dickhead, Tantra is just going to make you a more powerful dickhead.
Yes, that's very, because Tantra will amplify, and you work with like your neurosis. So yes, and it can get messy. So legit, I mean, I can share my influences. And so personal, I mean, like I said, my closest teachers are not Tantric teachers, the Buddhist geeks, but there are many. I mean, usually what you want to look for is somebody who's accessible. So if there are like thousands of followers, I mean, you can start there. You get the empowerment and the practice, but it's like I said, you really want to have like mentorship, so more closer and see from what. But and then a lot of the influence are not were not personal teachers of mine. It's more like authors and books. So and in that, so in and this is also like people who are adapting the teachings from outside of the Tibetan culture, for instance, even though they learn with Tibetan teachers, their teachings are not. So one of them is Reggie Ray. He's I worked a lot. I mean, with him it was somatic meditation, working with the body, and he has a lot of audio books and things like that, which were very, I mean, easy to enter and start with. It's another one is Ken MacLeod. He doesn't teach. So Reggie Way, and there'd been like a scandal around some problem with the community, not anything egregious like we've seen, but still, he basically the community has shrunk in the last year as he taking some time to reflect on. But the teachings were sound. And Ken MacLeod, so he's a Mahayana, also Kagyu, but he's actually writing a book on Vajrayana from the point of view of Western. It should be out next year, but it's always interesting to listen to very clear instruction. What Nakpa Chogyan Rinpoche, who is the older of the Arrow-Ter lineage, has a lot of books. Arrow-Ter is actually a traditional lineage, but it's a Western tradition. I mean, it's very different. It has all of the. It has, Tibetan. It used Tibetan, so they have the white robes of the non-renunciate, the Nakpas.
Yeah.
And they have like lamas in multiple places. So that's kind of a traditional lineage, which is very with the Dzogchen view, which is compatible with the Western world, but it is still very traditional. What else? There is. So I mentioned David Chapman doesn't teach, but he's a former. I mean, he was part of the Arrow-Ter, and his partner Charlie Avery. They started Charlie and Jared James. They started the Evolving Ground, which is a peer sangha for people who want to practice tantra.
Okay.
Without the Tibetan overlays.
Yeah.
It started this summer. They are very interesting to check out. But these are all the influence for myself. And then there's the site which I started with, which was the Himalayan tradition. This is more Hindu, not Buddhist at all.
Mm-hmm.
But swamij.com, lots of instructions.
Okay.
But yeah, and so it depends on what style of is it what style of practice you're interested in. So like I said, my style, what I'm interested in is more like the more formless Dzogchen, even though engaging with form is very much part of it. Yeah. What else? I have anything else. Yeah, and I mean,
just kind of look around and use your discretion, I guess, right?
Yeah, exactly. and when looking at teacher, one thing I find is a good thing is, do they have a good sense of humor?
Yeah.
That's if they're kind of are able to laugh at themselves or people laughing at them and incorporate that well with that. that's a good. If there was one only thing to look for, that's what I would be looking for. But that's because I mean, if it's too serious and
right, no, I totally understand that.
Narcissism and all of that. Which,
yeah.
I mean, you have very adepts who are still narcissistic maniacs.
Yeah.
We've seen, and this is why we've seen all of these scandals.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no.
It just made them into more powerful dickheads.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, was there anything that you would like to share with our listeners then? Like, you said that you are teaching through Buddhist Geeks, right?
Yeah. Yes. As a Dharma teacher, really spiritual mentor, I teach from what I practiced and learn. Anything else? Yeah, no, I think I'd say the Tantric view, I really believe it's one of the most compatible view from the life that we live as Westerner, from the an engaged worldly mystical practice. So if that's interesting to you, that is something.
Definitely. No, I've loved everything I've learned about Tantra, and it's jived with me pretty well. So, thank you for being on with us. Thank you for answering all of these questions. I know some of them have been pretty big and couldn't really be nailed down very easily, but thanks for taking a shot at it. And
yes, and sorry for all confusion.
No, that's totally okay. So thank you again, Francis.
Getting comfortable with confusion is really part of the battle.
Fair enough. So thanks again. Thank you for everything.
Take care.
The Faith Blind Council would like to give a big shout out to the Folk Magic Society. Based in Minneapolis, Minnesota, this group explores how people do magic around the world, including spells, divination, dolls, talismans, astrology, and more. Normally meeting at Mage's Books at 1848 Central Avenue on the second Saturday each month, they've recently expanded their presence by hosting online discussions. The host, Dave, is an archaeologist who shares a wealth of knowledge on the history of magic and spiritual practices. To learn more and join in an upcoming event, look for the Folk Magic Society on Facebook. Are you looking for one-of-a-kind handmade tools to add to your left-hand path practice? West of Hell masterfully crafts items ranging from leather masks to wands made from authentic human bone, all to aid you in your crusade against the tyranny of the demiurge. Prayer beads consecrated to Lucifer or Hecate, hand-etched magic mirrors, and even Chaos Star inverted rosaries are all part of their expanding inventory. Get started on your journey to bring down the powers and elevate your own godhood with tools, jewelry, and apparel from West of Hell. Visit them online at westofhell.square.site. That's WESTOVHELL.square.site.
All right. Fucking dope, man. Big thank you to Francis for coming on and you know, obviously having a lot more fucking experience than I do. Legitimately, like, Francis knows what the fuck they're talking about. So, like,
and
that's
all of the resources that he had mentioned in there, he did give us basically like a bunch of links for it, and we're going to post that up like in the description for the episode or whatever, so that you can check those out as well.
Yeah, they will also be available on the Discord server, which, if you are not in our Discord server, I would highly encourage checking that out, just as a quick shameless plug.
Yeah.
We have a pretty dope community there, pretty active. there are a lot of people that have a breadth of experience about a lot of different things, Tantra being one of them, and we will have those resources available on that server as well.
Yep.
So, yeah, big thank you again to Francis for that.
Many thanks.
Let's move on and just kind of take a hard right into, quests is what we've agreed on, right?
Yeah, it's quests.
Sure.
That's just the running joke now, is that we always have to confirm that we're calling it quests still.
Yeah,
that's where we're going.
Still
with
there.
All right, so let's talk about quests. I vaguely remember us doing those for the sex magic episode.
That's okay.
Cologne
Cologne takes notes where we don't.
That's good. It's good to surround yourself with people that take notes.
Oh, is that my cue to tell you guys what quest you gave me?
That is your cue to remind us of what the fuck we even said.
That's the lead-in right there.
So,
I remember one of them being to basically find an alternate way of reaching like a sexual Gnostic state.
Oh yeah, now I remember mine. Okay, yep, okay.
Yeah, and the other was basically just to power Sigil, right? Using sex magic, like an orgasm.
Using
so
like
I'm gonna
edging,
start.
I think.
I think what I want to say about, like, because this is my first time. I've actually never did anything with sex magic before here, despite the joke that, you know, chaos magicians just like to orgasm on things, and that's how we do magic. Is I think my biggest revelation while doing it and practicing it is, you know, given what we were discussing about, you know, you really want to be focusing on your intent, you know, not using like other sensory inputs like porn and things like that, so that you can keep focused and stuff. That's a lot more difficult than maybe, like, I feel like if you're doing it right, it's more difficult than people make it sound like, you know, given that, you know, getting yourself to orgasm, getting yourself aroused, you know, involves a lot more than just physical sensory input. For most people, there's, you know, emotional, mental, like, there's all kinds of different input that can distract from what your intent is, you know. I think that's like the biggest thing I learned while doing it was, you know, figuring out how to keep the focus and feel like I'm actually doing something magical and focused, and, you know, and not getting myself distracted down, you know, just thinking about sex or just thinking about something that's sexually arousing, you know.
It's like hornier meditation.
Yeah.
Where, like, it's just so easy to get distracted.
Yeah, it really is. You know, because I think for a lot of people, and yeah, just like getting aroused isn't just physical input. You know, there's usually a lot of other techniques we all use to get aroused and reach orgasm, or to get close to it. And whether you're doing edging or actually reaching orgasm, it's not as easy as it might sound to be like, I am going to focus on my intent, on my sigil, on what I'm doing, but also try to reach orgasm.
Yeah, it's, you know, there is such it's like there's this conversation about sex, especially in America, where it's just about physicality. It's just about, like, dicks, tits, pussy, and ass, right? Like, there is zero conversation that happens about, like, the emotional intelligence, the spirituality, the connected, you know, mentality that goes into sex, right? And those things are so often overlooked that people are like, oh yeah, it's just cranking one out, you know, like, okay, dude who's been watching porn for the last 20 years.
Yeah.
Go do that. Go do that just in a room, right? Like, it is very, very off-putting at first.
Yeah, I mean, as far as ways of overcoming that, I mean, I think, kind of going back to the tantric thing, with really basic practices of breathing and stuff can definitely help. If you're somebody with a clitoris and stuff, and maybe you're using tools and vibrators or things like that, you can. I did things like drawing my sigil on my genitalia with a vibrator. If I'm not getting too graphic for people, but it does get you're focused on the shape of it. You are thinking about the sigil and everything while in the act, and you're physically using the sigil in a way. Things like that. So
I just draw my sigils to look like butts. So to kind of piggyback off of that, there's a thing that I have used before that is kind of like a Reiki exercise, where like when Reiki healers start out, they'll rub their hands together, right? To kind of draw that heat out, and then you use that heat to kind of like coalesce energy, I guess, for like a lack of better way of putting it, right?
Right.
But what you can do is like not necessarily trying to do Reiki on your junk, but while you're rubbing your hands together and kind of building that heat up, that's when you like really focus on your intent and kind of like say your statement of intent out loud if you want to, or just like really visualize it and whatever it is by growing that energy. And like that will get you into that state, because like how many people are just like, well, yeah, I'll give myself a fucking hot hand.
Yeah, I thought you were just going to go the route of like rub your hands together and then stick your dick in it.
That seems horrible. No. I mean, like, I'm not telling you how to live your life, but you don't get to tell me how to live mine. But yeah, no, I think it's, that is something that is wildly underplayed when it comes to like exploring one's sexuality, and especially in the context of sex magic, right? Is like getting yourself away from thinking about sex as this purely physical thing. So good job on finding ways around that.
Yeah, and I cheated a little bit with especially some of my earlier things where I was doing my intents did have a focus on certain parts of my sexuality and stuff like that. So that it's a little easier to kind of coax the focus, where it wasn't necessarily about, like, my intent wasn't about my orgasm, but it was about maybe other aspects of my sexuality or things like that, that maybe I wanted to have results with. So, like, maybe doing some of that, can also help coax you into the idea of, like, stepping into other focuses while trying to get to that gnosis state, or using that sort of sexual gnosis state.
All right.
Yeah, I think it's important to start with stuff that is easier, or like kind of a more logical step. Like starting with a square that you can circle in your head is going to build your confidence as a magician. Yeah,
because then you'll also more likely to see results, and like then you can step to something that's a little bit further away as far as the connection in your brain. You bring those connections closer and closer until, it works better, For something 100%. Something you would think that, oh yeah, having an orgasm isn't going to possibly affect this thing, but, as you step closer to that, you can, make it more effective.
Yeah,
agreed.
Absolutely.
Okay, so the next quest was, they, something else that gives a similar gnosis state. Is that the right phrasing I want to use?
Yeah, sure.
This might get a little weird. Cause
Yes!
to me, and, I mean, I knew this was going to be a TMI sort of episode, so I might as well just go headlong into it. You know, like an orgasm is it's a physical sensation. Once you get to it, that you are overwhelmed and pretty much not in control. You're entirely vulnerable, when it happens. So in that mindset, I had tried some other things like dancing and I think breathing can get you kind of close-ish, but right. I don't think it's at all the same sort of experience as something that's really is a physical process that you don't have a whole lot of control, that gives catharsis, that puts you in a vulnerable state that you are totally focused on when it happens. So I think the things that are closest, one is something that people probably don't want to associate all to it, would be urinating and defecating. Especially if you've been holding it for a long time and stuff. One of the things that made me think and go to that is, have either of you seen the movie The Fisher King?
No, I haven't.
Oh, it's one of my favorite.
Now I feel like I need to.
It's one of my favorite movies. I love it. It's one of those movies that it's weird and strange, but I also feel like it's very accessible for people who aren't into weird and strange movies. It's one of Terry Gilliam's most probably accessible movies, and I love it. It's one of my favorites. In any case, Robin Williams' character at one point is describing how he's having, a shit that is just orgasmic, that it's, comparable to having an orgasm, and in some sense it's because it's a complete cathartic release, right? It's totally physical. You don't have much control over it once it starts, and I know that probably sounds gross and weird, comparing it to an orgasm, but really on a physical level it is. And same with urinating, if you haven't urinated in a while, that moment of release is just that, you are focused on nothing else. It feels so good. You don't have a lot of control at that moment, when you're really just experiencing it. You're just focused on the cathartic release, physical release of it.
I think we've all been in a time in our lives where we've had to take such a raucous piss that's the only thing you can think about.
Dude, I've been on road trips.
You've been holding it all fucking day. You're this is it.
I regularly go on 9-hour road trips. I get it.
And all you can do is you're just looking at the signs on the side of the highway, when does this one have a shitter? Fuck. Okay, what about this one? Damn it! And you just that's all you can think about. You're not worried about your gas tank. You're not worried about is my tire pressure okay? You're not worried about did I miss my exit? All you can think about is how much you have to piss.
Yep.
That's gnosis.
Yeah, and then when you actually fucking get there, you're just staring at the wall, or just you're closing your eyes. Just,
yes.
God, yes. Oh
exactly.
Yeah, that's fuck.
We have all been there. I think that's a perfectly valid take, right? And it's a little bit gross to boot, and I love it.
Yep.
And then my other comparison is also a physical reaction. I would say a deep cry is almost like an orgasm. When it finally, that sort of emotional release, it's cathartic. You are vulnerable. If you're truly crying deeply because of something that you don't have much control over, you aren't in control. It just has to happen, and it kind of consumes where you're at and what you're doing at that moment. I think there's some comparison there as well.
I get it. I see that. I think a place that I would go with that is intense fear, right?
Yeah, not actually, I was thinking the same thing. Fear
which
gnosis.
Sometimes can result in urination
or a fraidy boner.
Yeah, I guess.
But no, that not that level of jump scare, in a horror movie or whatever, but that intense creeping, oh fuck, all you can think about is getting out. Right?
Terror. Terror as opposed I would say terror as opposed to fear.
Yeah, I think that's more apt for sure. I think obviously, I don't think there's like the catharsis that would be associated with like orgasm gnosis, but that like single-mindedness and feeling of not being in control, I think is there as well.
Yeah, agreed.
So yeah, I think what I'm gonna try now is like the next time I want to charge a sigil, just hold my pee in for hours, and then when I'm pissing, I'm gonna go pee my sigil.
There you go.
Out and like make the sigil with my pee.
That's what we got.
And we'll
out of
see
it.
how that works.
That is what we got out of it. Yep.
Piss sigils. I'm there. I'm with it. We're so fucking ridiculous. All right, so let's move on to this episode's challenges, quests. Quests. Yeah, those. Let's move on to those. Let's do that. Words.
Okay, so for my quest for you involving the whole non-dual mentality of Shaiva Shakti Tantra is it's less of a practical thing and more of something to change your mindset in regards to things. So what I would like you to do is make a list, and it doesn't have to be an enormous fucking list or whatever. Just make a list of things that you think would be, like, evil. Things that are wrong, things that are bad, whatever. Make a list of those, and then write a positive about them. Like, how that could possibly not be evil. Or not be wrong. And it could be things, like, as fucking terrible as, like, children being born dying of starvation or some shit. Find out, like, try and come up with a positive about any of those situations in order to force your mindset into a non-dualist approach.
Okay. Got that.
So like suicide could be terrible unless Hitler's the one doing it. Then it's pretty okay. It's fine mostly at that point. Okay, so for my quest for you for this episode is to create something, right? A piece of art or, whatever. Create a thing, and over the process of creating it, write down or somehow document the things you notice about how your consciousness is affected by the act of creating.
That's a good one. I like that.
Which I'm going to do that too. And then I also, and this one's completely optional, I invite you to join me on 30 days of Tantra. You don't have to. That's for everybody, by the way. Listeners, everybody. Pick something weird and new. Learn it. Do it for 30 days. See if it changes. See if anything clicks with you. So, yeah, I'm actually super excited about this month moving forward.
Can I ask specifically what you are doing for your 30, like, what sort of practices, what sort of things you're going to do for your 30 days of Tantra?
So what, like, starting out is to, like, take an inventory of the things I already do. One of the things I do is a Tibetan death meditation, which is, like, it has a tantric leaning, because basically the short version of it is you focus on 9 different aspects of death, right? And the aspects that you focus on are things that are, like, at a glance, they're bad, right? Like, the human body is weak and vulnerable. The exact time of death is unknown to anybody. One of them is, like, the last 3 are basically, like, at the time of death, your loved ones cannot help you. At the time of death, your possessions will not save you. At the time of death, your body is useless. Like, those are the last 3. And there's a few more in there that I can't remember off the top of my head. But the idea is that you focus on kind of the finite nature of life, And through doing that, you gain resolution and you gain inspiration on, like, making the time that you have matter. Basically. So the first step is to, like, write down a list of those types of things that I do regularly. And figure out, you know, is there stuff that I've been doing and just didn't have a language for? And then, like, practically speaking, the big thing that I'll probably start with is experimenting with different breathing techniques besides, like, the 4x4. And then also looking into, like, different, you know, books to read, different things to kind of, like, expand my knowledge. So, like, I can't say for certain, like, I'm going to do A, B, C, and D for these 30 days, because I might read something and be like, oh, that's really fucking dope, I should try that. But the other thing that I'm going to be doing is trying to incorporate, like, the principle of polarity into more of the things that I do. And stop looking at things as, like, a this or that kind of, you know, viewpoint on life, I guess.
All right,
Okay.
and yeah, along with the links and resources that Francis had given us, there's a couple that I can send you in regard to, like, Shaiva Shakti Tantra that might help kickstart things for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I'm actually super fucking excited about doing this. This has been kind of a long time coming. And it sounds kind of shitty to do, but, like, from the time that I knew that we were going to be doing a Tantra episode, I have kind of shied away from reading a lot about it, because I kind of knew in my head, like, months ago, like fucking last year, I knew in my head, like, when this episode comes up, this is a thing I want to do. Like, I want to try to dive into something without having read a billion fucking books about it. You know?
That's fair.
So yeah, I am super fucking excited to do this.
On that note, I think we should do a divination for how this next 30 days will work for all of us then.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're going to be doing what's called Clairemancy, which is and I've done it before, just, like, going out into public or whatever back before the whole pandemic when you could. And
back when the public was a thing.
In the before times. And what Clairemancy is divining from sounds that you hear in a crowd.
Okay.
And so over our messenger, I have sent you both a link. If you want to pull that up, it's a file it's pretty short file. It's like 30 seconds long of a crowd. And so
okay.
if you want to if we can all just give that a listen, and then from that we can move on from there and say what we got out of it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So out of that, I picked up a couple, like, basically 3 phrases kind of stood out to me. One of them was, from what I heard just listening to it the first time, was, we're doing this again, go hard, and no. That's what I heard out of it, and so from that, I'm gathering, like, you know, we're going to be doing, like, it's all going to seem familiar to us, or to myself in this practice. We're going to go into it very hard, and the no part is, I don't know, that was kind of tough to figure out. It was more like kind of like an exasperated thing, like I realize, or one of us realizes, we've been doing something wrong in the past. So yeah, that's we're going to go into it, realize, hey, this is something I've been doing for a while, but we are going to go into it hard and then realize, oh, shit, well, I should have been doing that differently the whole time.
Cologne, what do you got?
Two phrases that came out to me the strongest. What I heard, have a ride, which I kind of like that. It makes me think like Bill Hicks, sort of. It's a ride. You're gonna. I think that's somewhat apropos to the idea of Tantra, that like experiencing things and ups and downs. It's all a ride, and you're learning that. And the other was so much fun. So here's hoping I have fun.
Hell yeah.
I think I'm going to.
Nice. So, a couple of things that are interesting to me. The first one I picked out was a guy talking about the color red. He was trying to describe something, and he just kept, like, it's a red, something. He was talking about that, right? When you think about, like, red in the context of chaos magic, red is, like, war magic, which is very oppositional. So I think that one or all of us is going to, like, have that idea challenged. Like, the idea of things being oppositional or confrontational, right? This or that. Like, that's going to be challenged, right? And then the second thing that I picked out, I think it was the same thing you heard, Cologne, but I heard it instead of as have a ride, I heard it as have a good cry. Like,
it's a ride, man. It's a ride.
Well, but like, which going back to our, the thing we were talking about just earlier with, catharsis and having that good deep cry and like emotional outlet being a thing that is inherently transformative. Right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that, like, one or all of us are going to, experience some kind of transformation. Like, how deep it's going to be, I don't know. But those are the things that I picked out.
It'll be a ride, man.
It'll be a cry ride. Get in, loser.
Cry
We're
ride.
going crying.
Get in the car. We're going crying.
All right. I think that pretty much that's got us to where we need to be for this episode, right?
We're pretty sure.
I think we got everything. All right, cool. Well, I guess the only thing left is we again, a big thanks to Francis for coming on and, talking for a while about Tantra and what it actually is.
Yep.
I'd like to also give a thanks to our sponsors. As always, you can support us by supporting them. And I think after that, the only shit we have left is a real quick hail skafuckle.
Hail skafuckle.
Hail skafuckle.
And I think that's it. We are going to be out of here. We will catch you soon. Peace.
Later.
Be seeing ya.
This has been a production of the Faith Blind Council. Please consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/faithblindcouncil. We would also like to thank our sponsors. You can support us by supporting them. You can also contact us on Twitter at FBC Podcast, the number 1, on Instagram at FBC Podcast, and via email at faithblindpod@gmail.com.